But if you are working in a big organization with hundreds of users, it can be a real chore to administer P6. And people get very aggravated. And one of the things that people had hoped was when they moved to the Oracle Primavera SaaS environment, or the Primavera Cloud environment, that things would get easier. But in fact, they've just become more difficult because everything's loaded in the cloud and you've got to go through a web access. So it's even become more difficult than ever. This is also a problem for customers who have multiple databases because they want to duplicate structures from one database to another. We have one client who runs a different database for every client that he has. So he's got 15 or 20 different Primavera databases, and every time he gets a new client, he has to create a new one and he has to set up the structures and everything else. So that can be a real chore if you have to do it manually. The next thing is projects and baselines. We get so many calls from people who say, I need to load this list of 2,500 construction work packages into a project activity code dictionary. Is there an easy way to do it? Well, the answer is yeah, you can do it with P6 Loader. You can just load your whole activity code dictionary in a matter of seconds. But if you want to do it any other way, it's going to be a lot of typing. People also struggle with managing and updating baselines. There is a baseline update utility in P6, but it's pretty crappy and it's hard to see what it's done. It kind of runs in the background and you don't really know what it's done or whether it's been successful. P6 Loader allows you to treat baselines just like active projects. You can extract them, update them, and upload them again. Data integration. Well, no, in 2020, in the 2020s, no system exists by itself. There's data moving between all kinds of different systems. And if you're an SAP company or an Oracle financials company, there are pre-built integrations that will move data from those tools to P6. So that's great. But you need to have a big tool like SAP and you need to have a lot of money to implement it. What if you have an older system or a smaller system that's not as well supported? Well, P6 Loader allows you to take information and load it into P6 and extract it from P6. And virtually every tool out there will work with Excel. So you dump your job plans from your job planning tool into Excel, you load them into P6, or you dump information from your accounting system into Excel and load it into P6. So it just makes things really easy. Eventually, you may decide that you want to do a full-blown, you know, two-way data integration, but P6 Loader can also help you work out your data flows and make sure that everything's working properly. Um, Again, by just mocking things up and then running it through Excel. So we can say, okay, here's what we think the data flow is going to look like. Let's try it out. We'll tweak it a little bit before we sit down and actually start writing code. Team engagement. Well, much as it pains me to admit it, not everybody in the world actually likes working with P6. I mean, I've worked with it since day one. I know what it does. I know how it works. To me, it's just second nature. It's no problem. But I come across people all the time who've never used it before and don't really want to have to put in the effort to learn it. I mean, there is a very steep learning curve, and people don't want to make that investment. But again, everybody can use Excel. So you can send them an Excel spreadsheet, they can update their progress, they can send it back, and you can upload it into P6. Consistent portfolios. We come up with data structures that we expect people to use, so we can use our business intelligence software to look across our projects. But it all falls apart if everything isn't consistently coded. So if we forget to do some coding, it can be a real chore in P6 to go back and update coding after the fact. But with P6 Loader, I could take my coding structure. Maybe I've updated my live project. Now I've got 10 baselines I need to update. If I have to do that manually, that's going to take a very long time. I'm going to have to take the baseline, unlink it from the project, make it into a project, update it, put it back. I can do all of that with P6 Loader, backfill all that data in a matter of minutes. I extract from one project and I upload into all the baselines and I'm done. So again, if you need to set up some consistency in your structure, P6 Loader is a great tool to do that. So let's talk a little bit about how P6 Loader works. So the first thing is it can be On premise. So if your P6 is on in your data center or in your company, and your Excel is in your company, P6 Loader can be in your company. And so everything can basically work within your company's walls. Um, but it also works if you're in the cloud. So if you're running Excel in the cloud, or you're running P6 in the cloud, you can also run P6 Loader in the cloud. So the idea is that any part of that can be in the cloud, and you can have some kind of hybrid where some things are in the cloud. For example, you might have P6 in the cloud, but you've got Excel and P6 Loader on premise. So these are all options. And because P6 Loader works either with um, Primavera's web services or with the APIs, we have maximum flexibility in terms of how we upload data. Let's talk a little bit about the technology. There's a number of different ways that you can get information in and out of P6. So the first one, and the oldest one, is the XCR. And a lot of people like to go and modify XCRs and use XCRs as a tool to get information in and out of P6. But you got to be very careful because there's no data validation around XCRs. Whatever you put in that file, P6 will read. And we've had more than one customer load an XCR in. Then when they try to log into P6, they get some obscure error message, and it won't load. We had one a couple of years ago where somebody had actually spelt the word global incorrectly in an activity code dictionary they were trying to load. So when P6 started up and it tried to read that dictionary, it got to that word and it didn't know what to do with it, and it threw an event code and crashed. So there's no data validation. As such, there's no support from Oracle. So if you mess around with your XCR and you corrupt your database, Oracle support won't touch it. The other thing is to use XCRs, you have to have you have to basically be a super user. So in order to be able to import an XCR, you have to be a project super user. And there's no access to global data. It's project only. So Primavera tried to fix that a little bit themselves. They made the P6 XML import, and it's a little better than the XCR in that it can be validated. It is supported, but for the average user, going in and actually trying to work with an XML file is actually not that easy. It's this incredibly large, cluttered text file, and actually doing anything with it's very difficult. The other thing is it only does one project at a time, and it doesn't do global data, just like the XCR. So there's another option, the SDK. Well, the SDK stood for Software Developers Kit, and it was Primavera's first shot at making an integration program available. But there were some challenges with it. The biggest one was that you had to be a super user. You had to be a admin super user to use it. So it would touch global data. It was validated. It did let you do selective extraction. It did do multi-project. So it had all the tick boxes, except you had to be an admin super user to use it. So the only people who could use it were system administrators. The average user could not use it. The other thing is it's no longer supported by Oracle. So they dropped support for it about 5 years ago. So if you're still using an SDK based tool and it fails, you're on your own. Finally, there is a built-in P6 Excel import in P6, and it does data validation. It is supported by Oracle, and it lets you select what you extract to update. But it doesn't do global data. Um, it doesn't it doesn't work with P6 security profiles, and it's one project at a time. So P6 Loader checks all the boxes. We access all the data in P6. We respect the security in P6, so you can only download or upload things with P6 Loader that you have access to in P6. If I don't have access to a project in P6, I can't download it into Loader. If I if I can't update the resource dictionary in P6, Loader won't let me update the dictionary either. We validate the data, so it's all checked. You'll get all kinds of good error messages if something doesn't work to let you know what the problem is. It's supported by Oracle because we go through their web service and APIs. And in fact, P6 Loader is on the Primavera store at Oracle, so you can actually um, get get it there. And we're pretty proud of that. It was the first third-party utility that was on that store. It lets you selectively extract what you want, and it lets you extract as few or as many projects as you want at the same time. Now we have subject areas in P6 Loader. So we have global subject areas, we have resources and roles, we have project and activities, and then we have some utilities to help you manage your system. So When you want to do your extraction, you're going to extract global topics, user topics, or project topics. And the idea here is once I've pulled that information down, I can manipulate it and I can load it back up. And Sue will show you that when she gets into the demo part. Now, when it comes to projects, you can extract one project or many projects. You can extract your baselines. You can extract your resources and your expense assignments. All of that can be pulled out so that you can manage it. Once you've pulled your data down, you can run a macro on it in Excel. You can use Excel's formulas like VLOOKUPs. You can use smart filters. You can use all the great data tools that you have in Excel to manipulate your data in any way that you want. I was working on one the other day where somebody gave me a list of new resources that they needed to load into their P6, but it had been dumped out of an SAP system, and so all we had to do was basically put it in the P6 format and upload it, and away we went. So it was very quick and very easy. As I said, once you've got it in the format you want, you upload it, and you're good to go. So let's a little bit about the different subject areas we have. So we've got user info, EPS, OBS, user defined fields. Well, the list is pretty exhaustive. You can see everything that we do here. We also, though, have some utilities. So we allow you to roll down activity codes. So an activity code roll down means that you can take a global code and make it an EPS code, or take an EPS code and make it an activity level code. In P6, you can promote them to a higher level, but you can't demote them to a lower level. You can read XCRs or XML files. You can clean the XCR files to get rid of those nuisance POBS and risk types that clutter up the files. You can run job services. So you can tell the system, okay, after I've loaded all my files, reschedule all my projects. You can do calendar roll downs, which means you can take a global calendar and make it a project calendar. You can even move layouts from one P6 system to another, and reports as well. So that's a big one, because if there is an export import process around layouts in P6, but it doesn't really work very well, because unless the database you're moving to is exactly the same as the one that you're moving from, none of the layouts actually work. They come up with all kinds of errors, and then you got to manually fix them, and it actually ends up being faster to just create them from scratch. But with P6-Loader, you can actually go and move layouts, filters, reports from one database to another. Okay, so again, very easy if you're trying to move to a new database, or you're trying to duplicate data from one database to another. So I got this great report in one database. I'm going to be working in another database. I can just move that report across. So let's take a look. I'm going to hand control over to Sue, and Sue will walk through the tool with you, and then I'll join back at the end and just summarize everything. Sue, you good?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen here so that we can take a look at the tool in action, so to speak. Um, so, with P6Loader, it is a web-based application. So you have a URL that is for your system, and as Ian said, we can actually go to uh, different databases. So it's just like P6. You open up the database options, you select the database that you would like to work with, and then you sign in and you're able to work with that database. Now, if you're working with several different databases, there is an easy way to find out which database you're working in. Down here at the bottom, it tells you which database you are actually hooked up to within P6Loader itself. Now, on this first page is where we're kind of getting the results of all the extracts as well as the uploads that we've done in our tool. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the extraction module. So in the extraction module, I'm just going to expand these all so we can see them. And I'm having trouble, looks like, scrolling. So I'm going to log out really quick and reload so that I can get my scroll back. So I'm in the extraction. Let's see if I can scroll now. Yep, now I can scroll. So we've got all those modules that Ian was talking about. We've got, our user information. So we've got our global profiles, our project profiles, um, user OBS, things like that. I've also got, I'm just going to collapse these as I go, all that global information that we can go out there and we can extract, we can load it in, everything from OBS EPS to activity codes, project codes, calendars, etc. We've also got roles and resources. So all of those pieces and parts to resources that you might be wanting to either create or edit are here for you to work with in the roles and resources. We also touch risk information. So we've got our categories, our thresholds, our matrices, and all of that for our risks. Um, Ian talked about some utilities that we provide. Not only can we do things like a calendar and a code roll down, we can also go out and we can analyze where these pieces of information are used in our P6 environment. So we can tell which projects are using those, if they're used at all. And this really helps if you're trying to kind of tidy up and clean your system or your database so that it's more streamlined. So sometimes you have uh, occasions in which you've been in your Primavera environment for quite some time, and maybe you aren't using the same UDFs or codes that you did before. You can actually go out there, find out where they are. And if maybe you have the possibility of deleting some of that information because it's just not being used anymore. It also helps with consolidation. So if you had two separate activity codes, perhaps that actually were the same thing, you could see where those are used and see if you could consolidate those as well. Then we get into our project information. And our project information, again, has everything you would want to do with your project, your WBS, your baselines, your project itself, notes, all kinds of different information on your project level. We also finally have activity information. So, touching activities, those relationships, doing resource assignments, even doing our expenses, our steps, our activities, and things like that. Now, when you're working with a project, of course, you're going to need to select the project that you want to use. So on the right-hand side here, this is where we access the projects that we have in our EPS. So this is our EPS, basically set out, brought in from Primavera. And as we go down, we can see that, we could drill into wherever we want to go. And if I wanted to pull out information for a particular project or several projects, I would just need to check mark the ones or one that I want to pull out project information for. Now, for my first load that I want to show you here, I am going to, I have a database that I want to spin up quickly for a new client. And essentially, I have it all set up. It's over here, and I'm using the web application in this instance. And I need to set up my OBS and my EPS structures. Now, I have another database that I want to model this database after. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull out the structures from my existing database, which is over here in my client. And so I'm going to pull out this structure as well as the responsible managers, of course, the OBS, and I'm going to clean it up a bit. And then I'm going to load it into my brand new database so that I am set and ready to go with those structures. Now, the first thing I would do is, of course, pull out my EPS and OBS from the database where I'm getting my information from. So I'm going to go into my global information and I'm going to select my OBS and my EPS. And then I'm going to tell P6Loader to extract that information for me. Now, once it's done, I can download that Excel file. And that Excel file will come in and it will open up in my uh, Excel. And this is my current structure in my existing database. So when I bring out information, you can see that I selected two modules. So I have both my OBS and my EPS tabs here. So each module will come out as its own worksheet. On each worksheet, you've got some things that are going to guide you on this header here on the way of how to handle the information. The information with a red background in the header indicates that this is required information that you have to have when you're working with your OBS. Now, we do have fields that come out that have kind of an orangish red font to them. Now, these are indicating that in this case, my name I can change or remap using this particular column. So because this is a required piece of information, I don't want to just go in there and type whatever. I actually need to say, hey, I need to rename this. So I would put my new name in this column, save it and load it up, and it would go out and it would change this name. Now I also have blue and gray. Gray is informational only. So I can see that I've got some information about my modifications to this particular row of information. So I have when it was created, the date, who updated it last, and when. So I also have these dark blue ones. This is data that you can actually edit right in this column. So if I were to want to change a parent OBS ID, I could simply put it here and it's going to go out and it's going to make the changes based on what is put into this column. I'm just going to hop on over to the EPS so you can see that the EPS has some different information that is required to work with an EPS. I need an ID, I need a name, and I need my OBS ID. Now, if I'm not working with these optional fields, either blue or gray, or even this orange, and I just want to narrow it down and focus on the columns of data that I want to work with, I can just remove these from my sheet. And I can say, I don't need to see these. There's something that I just don't need to deal with right now. I can actually remove those off and then I can focus on the actual information that I want to work with. So makes it really easy to, simplify what you're working with here. Now, I want to clean this up and I want to load it into my new database. And so, in the interest of time, I'm not going to have you watch me do that. I've already done that in a different sheet. So, as I did this, I can see I had my structure, my OBS structure that came out. Well, I found that everything was good except for I wanted to add a training and sandbox area. So I just simply added those lines into my sheet so that that is going to be created when I load this into my new database. Now on my EPS here, I have done a little bit of cleanup. There's still some other stuff that I want to deal with later on. So I'm going to save that for later, and I'm going to tell P6Loader to skip that information underneath where it says junk still to clean up by putting a blank line. So anything underneath that blank line is not going to load. It's going to actually just load up until row 23 here on my count. So I can save this other stuff for later, maybe clean it up and then later on, load it again and do that. I've also added my training and sandbox area to this load as well. So I've got this already. I've saved it, and I'm ready to now create those structures in my new database. So I'm going to go over to P6-Loader, and I want to make sure that I'm loading it into the proper database. So I'm going to log out of this database, and I'm going to choose my clean database. And it's brand new, so I still have an admin password that's going to work on it. And I'm going to sign in, and I'm going to go to the upload area. So the upload area is going to give me a place where I can choose the file or files. So we can do multiple files at a time. We can choose many, and then it will go ahead and upload those for me in succession. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to browse to where my file is, and then I'm going to tell P6-Loader to upload that file into my new database. That's going to go out. It's going to show me that it's working on it. And then once is successful, I can go over into my database where I loaded it into and refresh to bring that information back in. And then I can see that I have loaded my structure as well as I have created my OBS or responsible manager as well. So really easy way to spin up a new database kind of on the fly and get it working and out there very quickly. Now, the next thing I would like to do is start cleaning up my old database. So my old database, I have some codes in a project that are a little messed up. You can see I've got kind of a mess going on here. I've got some duplicate equipment codes as well as some specs codes that are duplicated. At some point, they got either created at different levels, or they didn't. A user didn't realize that we already had one going and created another one. So not only do I want to clean these up, but I also need to push down to the EPS level some of these codes as well as to the project level. So my phase code actually is only um, used in a particular EPS that I work in, that this particular project is in, as well as my equipment code. Now my specs and my work order are codes that really just need to be at the project level. They only are important to this project, and so that's the only place I need them. So I can use the one of the utilities that Ian spoke about called the roll down activity code roll down feature. So what I've done is I have taken those codes that we just looked at. I have defined where they are now as a global or an EPS code. And then I'm telling it what level I want to roll it down to. I also am going to rename them just so that it's easy for us to see the changes that were made. Now, in the case that I need to combine two codes into one code and dictionary, I have named those the same name. So when P6-Loader goes out and establishes this equipment code, it's going to combine equipment A and equipment B dictionaries and put them into the same code. So I don't have to go in and manually do that. The same is going to happen with my specs. Um, and then on my work order, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the name that already is, and then I'm just going to roll that down. Now, in the case of rolling it to the EPS and the projects, I need to identify what I want this to be associated with. What EPS do I want this EPS code to be associated with? Or which project do I want the EPS code or the code activity code to be associated with? This last column here is um, where I can tell P6-Loader what I want to do with that original code. Do I want to delete it or do I want to keep it? So maybe I want to go back and make sure that my phase code and my equipment and specs are not used in any other projects before I actually delete them at the global level. So I've chosen to uh, take those and not, for now, delete them. However, on my work order, I am going to go ahead and delete that. I know that it's just going to roll down at the project level. That's the only place it's going to go. And this is the only project that it's used in. So I have this all set up, and now I'm ready to load this in with P6 Loader. So first of all, I need to get back to the proper database. So I'm going to go there and log in. I'm going to go to my upload, and I'm going to select that code roll down and tell P6 Loader to make those changes for me. So it's going in, it's taking those codes and combining them where that needs to and rolling them down. So when I go back into P6, now that it's completed, and I refresh my data, I'm going to see that those codes are no longer assigned because P6 Loader has already reassigned them for me when I did this change. So I'm going to go into my columns here and take a look. So I've got my EPS codes here, and here's my new equipment code, as well as my phase code. And then I have uh, my activity codes at the project level where my specs are, as well as my work order code. So when I come and bring those in, I can now see that the values were reassigned. And in the case of the equipment and the specs, they have been combined, and that assignment has gone along with that roll down as well. So really nice tool to have when you're cleaning up and manipulating your activity codes, as well as we can do this with calendars. So we can also do this with calendars and roll them down from the global level to a project level. Now, let's kind of move over to to the users kind of side of the house. So I'm going to just change a layout here and open a different project. I am developing a new project. And so I want to go out and do all the things that I need to create my project. I've got a lot of different information that I want to uh, bring in as part of my project creation. And not only am I going to bring in items for my project, I'm also going to work and start building out my P6 Loader um, resources in the same place. So I have this big file. And keep in mind, you don't have to load these all at the same time. I could do these piecemeal at a time. So if I had my WBS at one point, I could go in and just load my WBS, and then later on, create maybe the activities. Maybe I find out I need an activity code to go along with it. I could do that at a separate time. But in this particular example, I'm doing it all at once. So I've got my WBS being built out here. I've got my higher levels that I am creating, but I'm also creating some children to some of these WBS nodes so that I can go ahead and put some activities underneath each one of these. Now, with this particular project, I need to create some activity codes. So they're going to be at the project level, and I'm going to create those, and then I'm going to tell it which project I need to associate those codes with. Now, this is the creation of the code itself, the code name. On this other sheet where it says activity code, this is where I'm going to actually start building out my dictionary. So for my discipline code here, I've got my code values as well as my description. And then for my area, I've got some values here, as well as my work packages. I've got those uh, dictionary values being loaded in. Now I want to start working on my activities. So I've got my project ID. I've assigned my ID for my activity. I've also defined which WBS I want those to land in. And I'm using some of the functionality of Excel to help me build out my activity name here. So you can see I've got a formula here, my upper and my concatenate. Now I've added a column to help me with that concatenation. So I can add additional columns to my sheet. And as long as I have a title or a column header that P6 Loader does not recognize, it's going to ignore this particular column. So I don't have to take this out when I load my project or my load my file. I can keep this in here. And because P6 Loader doesn't recognize the word title, it's just going to skip over it and continue to load the rest of the information across these columns. So I'm using to build out my name, my title, my area, and my work package. So it's concatenating those and building that for me. Now, another thing I don't have to do is take this formula, the values of this formula, and copy and paste them as values. I can keep this formula in here, and P6 Loader knows to take the value that is returned from that. So I don't even have to take those out. I can keep those in there. Next, I have some expenses that I'm going to be building out for a couple of my activities here. So I've got those expense items that I'm defining. Got some cost accounts that I'm going to assign here, and got my accrual types and my prices. I can also build out my cost accounts. I need some a new cost account structure, so I'm going to go ahead and take that and build it in this same load. Now, on some of my activities, I actually have some steps, and some of those steps are the same, just on a different activity. So again, I could use my tools that I already have in Excel, and I can start taking those and building those out. So this actually is not 40. It's going to be here. And I can take this and copy it down. And then um, I can very easily copy those same steps into another activity based on a previous activity that I've already defined. Now, I need a rotating calendar for my resources. In this project, I have a group of resources that are going to be working on a rotating calendar. So I can make a calendar to accommodate that. So I'm making this resource calendar called P6 Loader Contractor 10 on, 4 off, rotating. And on this first tab for my calendar, I'm essentially just defining my calendar. On the second tab, I am defining my work time and work hours. So I've got my day of the week. I've also got the time of day that work will be performed. Now, the tricky part of this calendar is defining when those days off or non work times are going to be uh, added. So I've used again the formulas in Excel to help me out. So I've got the day that my first day off is going to occur. And then I've used a formula to go ahead and create those next exception dates on there. I can also hop to my next set of days off and then do those next four. So this is a lot easier than having to point and click and hold my control key down and set non-work times. And I can do it for a very long period of time so I can get items out there or I can get those exceptions out there very quickly. Now, I've also discovered that I need to create a contractor code in my resource codes. So I have my contractor code and I am populating it here. I'm even putting in some hierarchy on my code. So I've got my code value, and then I've got some code values that are underneath that hierarchy. Then I'm going to start building out my resources. So on my resources, I've gone and done set all my codes that I need to here. I've also assigned that rotating calendar that I'm creating to some of my resources so that I can um, get these all in there all at one time. Now, of course, if I have resources, I'm probably going to want to assign resources to my activities. So I can assign not only resources, but I can also assign my roles. I can put in my cost accounts, and I'm even doing some planning for each one of my resources on those activities. So uh, easy way to get that information all in there and ready to go. And if you have this information coming from different sources, a simple copy and paste, or as Ian mentioned, maybe a macro that's run is can put it into this format. Now, the last thing I want to do is, of course, build out my logic. So I've got my logic here. I've got my predecessor. Um, project as well as the activity ID and my successor project and activity ID and the type of relationship that I want to assign to it. I can also put in my lag. So if I have any lag that I need to deal with, I can put that in as well. Now, this also facilitates cross project relationships because we can put in the project ID as well as the activity ID. So in the case where you need to do cross project relationships, I can handle that as well in my relationships module. So I'm ready to essentially bring this in. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to upload that file to create my new project. So it's going out, it's kind of giving me a message as to what it's working on as it moves along. And once it's successful, I can come back and I can refresh my P6 data. And we can see now that here are my resources that have come in. There's my new calendar that's come in. And over on my activities, I have that all built out with calendars. I have durations. I have my logic, my resources roles, as well as my planning information. So, really easy to get information into P6 from scratch, as well as edit the information that's already out there. Now, another one I want to do is show you how we can work with baselines. So, I have a project here that has a baseline that we have some found work that we have discovered during the course of our project, and I want to add that to my baseline. Not necessarily change any, values in there for the baseline itself, but I do want to add in some found work. So I'm going to add in both in my baseline as well as my project. I'm going to add in that found work and activity. And then I found that I need to move some costs around between some activities in here. So I can pull out my baseline and I can bring it in and I can see that, okay, in this case, I can see my baseline one. That's the one I want to work with. But I also want to add in that found work. So I've got my found work here, and it is coming in on both my project as well as my baseline. I'm not adding any kind of costs in there. I just want to add that found work into my baseline so I can track it. And then I've got some of the items here on these two activities that I'm kind of debiting and crediting, moving some costs around, moving some units around to reflect what actually happened or started off as the project. Something changed. I had to make this baseline, and then something changed afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for those two activities as well as these two activities. Now, I don't have to load in all of this other information because I'm not doing any changes on these ones that aren't highlighted. So what I could do is I could use, again, the functionality in P6, and I could go and I could say, all right, I want to just filter by the ones that I actually am making changes to. So I would delete out everything else and just load these. So let's see what that looks like. Let's go and load that in and see how it changes our baseline for us. So these are pretty quick because I don't have a lot of information that I am working with on each of these. But even if I did, it's pretty simple. So now I can see here I've got my found work. I actually have I put a code on it, so I know that it's added work. I also have those uh, activities that are going to disappear for me that I debited and credited some of that, some of those dollars for and those units. So it went out, it did not only the addition to my project itself, but it also redistributed those costs and units for those several activities. Now, a lot of times we have our information for our updates coming in from different places, different team members or uh, groups. So a lot of times we don't have the luxury of everyone being able to um, be actually working in Primavera. So we might have the need to maybe send out um, and have other people tell us what our progress is on our project for our different activities. So I have two very simple projects here that right now nothing is started on, but I want to do my first update on that. Now, what I can do in with P6 Loader is I could extract these pieces of information and I could just narrow it down to the columns that I want my users to actually fill in. So in P6 Loader, we have a feature where you can define a specific extraction. So I've done that already. So I've got my project update extraction. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. And let's take a look at how I've defined this. So I have activity information out here, and I have my activity sheet. So when I go to my activity sheet, I have the ability to edit what columns are being pulled out. So I could run this on a regular basis with this particular definition, and I could just pull out what I needed to. So I'm going to be pulling out my project ID, my project or my activity ID, my name, my status, percent complete, actual start and finish, plan start and finish, and then I'm going to allow a suspend and resume date. Now, I don't have the need to bring out any of my user defined fields. So I've moved those all over and said, I don't want those to come in. I've also done that with my codes. So now when I go out and I extract it for any project, I am able to quickly do this and then provide it for my teams that are going to be updating this particular project. So I've already done that and I've received it back. So when I've received it back, I have the information that was put in by my team. I can see that I've got my milestones that have been completed. I have a couple of activities that have been started and are in progress, and we have actual starts for those. Now, I also have the ability on my resources to build these out so that I can put them into different financial periods or buckets. So I had some costs that occurred on my spread one that or in May and in June. And then on my spread three activity, I have some costs that came in June. So I can go ahead and load this up. Now at the same time, I can also set my data date on my project so that it's ready for me to schedule when I have this progress loaded in. So I'm going to go ahead and load in these updates. And I just am going to really quickly go out and look at these spreads so you can see that I don't have anything in my buckets yet. And once it's completed, I'm going to refresh. And now I can see I've got my start milestones that have completed. I've got the progress on, and these are two different projects, mind you. On both of my projects, I have each of those activities that were progressed, and I've got my bucket units that have been established here. So just a lot of different scenarios. I've only shown you a few scenarios that you might want to do with P6 Loader, but it's very powerful. It gives you a lot of leeway to manipulate your projects, manipulate your data at all different levels in Primavera, whether it's global, whether it's project, or even activities. So um, with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it back over to Ian so that he can wrap everything up.
Thanks, Sue. Okay, let's get back to our slides here. Okay, so we've got a lot of great customer feedback about P6 Loader. What's interesting is some of them are people who resisted originally getting P6 Loader, and then once they got it, they really liked it. Down the bottom is a quote from one of our customers who said, "We finally got it. I love it and wish we did this 2 years ago." That's great to see because that's a customer who I tried to sell P6 Loader to for quite a while because I saw they had a need, but I just couldn't get convince them. When they finally got it, they found it worked really well for them. Um, the idea here, though, is just to make your job easier, to make things go more smoothly, and to really expand the capabilities of P6. Um, so we do have clients who are running very large integrations through P6 Loader. One of the things that people often do is they use it to add a lot of information. We have one client who adds millions of activity updates every week through P6 Loader. So they basically load up all the data, and then once they've done that, then they reschedule all the projects, and it works really well for them. So just a couple of case studies, some of the clients who use P6 Loader. We have clients all over the world actually using the tool at this point. Um, and we can help you get it implemented as well. So one of the things that Emerald does is we're a full service Primavera shop. So we do training, we do implementation. So we really understand the pains that people have when they're working with P6. We have tools. We showed you P6 Loader today, but we have a number of other tools that really help people use P6 more effectively. We also provide services and training. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions that anybody may have. Feel free to type a question into the question or chat section. Um, and we have one comment here. Somebody said that they used it many years ago and how it was very helpful for them, which is great to hear. We hear that from a lot of our clients that the tool is a great way for them to make better use of their P6. And I don't have to tell you that, you know, doing data entry is the worst part of P6. No one wants to sit for 2 days typing in a list of work packages into the system. It doesn't matter whether you're an old time scheduler like Sue or myself, or whether you're like a brand new intern who just got their first job out of school. Nobody wants to sit for 2 days doing data entry. It's just misery. So, P6 Loader just makes that job so much easier. All right, so I see that there's no questions at this point. I guess we did a great job of explaining everything, Sue. So I'm just going to put our contact information up here. Um, so there is one question here. It only works for EPPM and not PPM. That's actually not entirely true. So the difference between EPPM and PPM is that an EPPM license includes the web service license. If you have PPM, you have to purchase a web service license. And those are about $500. So it will work with PPM provided that you buy that additional license from Oracle. If you have EPPM, that license comes automatically. So that's one of the differences between the two of them. The only other restriction is that it will not work on a SQLite database, and that's because Oracle didn't enable people to use the web services or the API with SQLite databases. So if you're running a SQLite database just on your local machine, you have to upgrade either to SQL Server or to Oracle XE, and then you can use the system. And there's no cost to do the upgrade to Oracle XE. That's just a matter of changing the database that you're running on, and then P6 Loader will work with your tool. Next question is the license per project, per database, or organization? So the licensing on the tool is actually by points. So the idea here is that you can have as many people as you want in your organization use P6 Loader. You can give as many people as you want access. You have a certain number of uploads and downloads available to you per month. And we have different size packages depending on the size of your database and how many loads that you're going to want. So you can start small. You can start with our standard package, and if you find that you need something larger, you can upgrade to our professional or corporate packages. And what we find is as people work with the tool, they generally find more and more use for the tool and expand it to more and more people, and therefore they go to the larger size tools. But we have different size options for different requirements. Okay, I think that's it. Unless there's any other questions. Um, okay, the other question was, does it work with Oracle and SQL Server databases? Yeah, either one of those works. So again, we work through the web services or APIs, and both Oracle and SQL Server are supported by the APIs. So the only thing we can't work with is SQLite, which is this. If you do a standalone version of P6, that's what it installs. But again, you can always upgrade to Oracle XE. All right, so we're just about out of time, so that worked out well. Um, Someone asked a question about how much is the software. We have a pricing structure. Sue's information is on the screen. If you'd like to just reach out to Sue, she can explain the pricing to you. So it's Sue F at emerald-associates.com, or her phone number is there. If you'd like to just reach out to her, she can go through the pricing structure with you so you can understand the different options that we have available. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Um, Again, our contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out to us and have a great day.
Thank you for joining. Have a great day.